Your position is being eliminated. Accept this entry-level role or leave. The HR representative stared at the wall behind me, not even granting me the dignity of eye contact. 20 years of my life, reduced to a 15-minute meeting where they couldn't even look at me. My throat tightened. Can I have until tomorrow? My voice barely audible as I thought about the mortgage payment due in 3 days. For 2 decades, I had poured everything into growing the firm's client portfolio. While colleagues attended their children's recitals and weekend getaways, I stayed behind, cultivating relationships with high-value prospects. My dedication transformed a struggling regional firm into an industry leader. Every holiday season, executives celebrated record profits I had directly secured. That evening, a former coworker sent me a message. Heard about what happened. For your information, your position wasn't eliminated. The CEO's nephew starts Monday. Before I tell you how I turned this betrayal into the most satisfying professional revenge of my career, I want to be clear about something. What you're about to hear isn't just another workplace drama. It's a masterclass in recognizing your own value when others fail to. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or cast aside despite your dedication, this story is for you. Listen until the end because the strategy I used didn't just restore my dignity, it completely transformed the power dynamic in ways nobody saw coming. And if you're enjoying our stories but haven't hit the like and subscribe buttons yet, please take a moment to do so. Your support ensures you won't miss any of our future uploads where real people share how they reclaimed their power in extraordinary ways. My name is Everly Quinn. For those who know me professionally, I've always been the problem solver, the one who could smooth over any client concern with a mixture of analytical thinking and genuine relationship building. I built my reputation on delivering results without drama, finding solutions where others saw dead ends. My colleagues used to joke that I could convince a fish to buy swimming lessons, but it wasn't charisma that built my success. It was genuine care for my clients' needs, combined with a work ethic that never allowed me to give less than my absolute best. Outside of work, I lived a deliberately simple life. My small lakeside home, with its overgrown garden and collection of mismatched teacups, was my sanctuary. I never married, not because I didn't want to, but because the right relationship never seemed worth sacrificing the career I'd built. Besides, I had my rescue dog Winston, who greeted me every evening as if I were returning from war rather than an office 10 miles away. I should have seen it coming. The signs were there, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious as weeks passed. Meeting invitations that somehow missed my inbox. Strategic discussions relocated to impromptu golf outings. Client information requests that bypassed my desk despite my history with the accounts. But when you've built your identity around a company for 20 years, denial becomes a powerful force. I chose to believe these were oversights, rather than orchestrated exclusions. The morning of my demotion began like any other. I arrived at 7 a.m., 2 hours before most of the staff, reviewing quarterly projections and preparing client presentations. My calendar showed a 10:30 meeting with Patrice from HR. Unusual, but I assumed it was about the health insurance changes that had been announced company-wide. When I entered the small conference room, Patrice wasn't alone. Our general counsel, a man I'd rarely spoken with despite our long tenure, sat beside her with a manila folder. Neither offered a handshake. After their bombshell announcement, I sat motionless, my mind racing through calculations. The entry-level position they offered came with a 62% pay cut. My mortgage, my mother's assisted living facility payments, even basic utilities would become impossible. This is happening regardless of your performance, Patrice added, as if this clarification offered comfort. The company is restructuring. Restructuring typically involves advance notice, I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. Severance packages, transition periods. The general counsel cleared his throat. This is the transition period. We're offering you continued employment when we could simply terminate your position. I wanted to scream that 20 years of loyalty deserved more than this clinical disposal, but instead, I asked for 24 hours to consider their generous offer. Back at my desk, I noticed colleagues averting their eyes. News traveled fast. My computer access had already been restricted. I could no longer view client contracts or revenue forecasts. 2 decades of institutional knowledge, and they had already begun erasing my digital footprint. I maintained composure while collecting personal items from my desk, a plant I'd kept alive since my first year, a handwritten note from my first major client thanking me for saving their business. Small treasures that suddenly felt like artifacts from another life. In my car, the professional facade crumbled. I gripped the steering wheel, pressure building behind my eyes, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, a strange clarity emerged. I reached for my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd never needed to use outside of scheduled quarterly meetings. Devin Aldridge, Chief Financial Officer at Midwestern Financial Partners, the $15 million account I had personally grown from a modest regional client to our company's crown jewel. Devin answered on the second ring. Everly? This is unexpected. Everything okay with the quarterly review preparations? I hesitated only briefly. Devin, I'm calling with a personal update. The company has eliminated my position, effective immediately. The silence on the line stretched for several seconds. That's surprising, he finally said, his tone shifting to something more guarded. May I ask why? Restructuring was the official explanation. Another pause. Where are you right now? Sitting in my car in the company parking lot. Stay there. I'm finishing up a meeting across town. 20 minutes. I didn't question why the CFO of our largest client would drop everything to meet me. In 20 years of relationship building, Devin and I had developed something beyond the typical client representative dynamic. We'd navigated industry shifts together, collaborated on innovative solutions, and established a foundation of mutual respect. 23 minutes later, Devin's electric sedan pulled alongside my car. He gestured toward a coffee shop across the street. Inside, over untouched beverages, Devin revealed what I had suspected but couldn't confirm. My company had been positioning the CEO's nephew to take over my client relationships for months. They'd already arranged informal meetings with several key accounts, including Midwestern Financial. He's bright enough, Devin said, but completely green. During our lunch, he spent more time dropping names than asking about our needs. When I mentioned the custom reporting system you designed for us, he suggested we migrate to their standard platform to streamline operations. I felt a flicker of vindication. The reporting system Devin mentioned had taken me months to develop specifically for their unique regulatory requirements. It was one of many customizations I'd created to cement our relationship. Here's what you need to know, Devin continued, leaning forward. Our contract renews in 60 days. We've been approached by 3 of your competitors in the last month alone. The only reason we haven't entertained their proposals is because of the relationship we have with you. My mind raced with implications. Devin, I appreciate that, but let me finish, he interrupted. Midwestern is expanding. We're acquiring 2 regional institutions next quarter, which means our service needs will increase substantially. We've been discussing whether to expand our agreement with your firm or build in-house capacity. He paused. I'd prefer a third option. Which is? You, as an independent consultant, initially to manage the transition, but potentially longer term. I stared at him, processing the suggestion. You want me to leave and take your business with me? Devin shook his head. I want to hire the person who's been instrumental to our success. The contract with your firm is a separate matter that our board will decide with input from whoever is advising us during this critical expansion period. I thought about the mortgage payment looming, about 20 years of loyalty rewarded with a humiliating demotion, about the CEO's nephew stepping into relationships I had cultivated through countless early mornings and missed weekends. I need to think about this, I said. Devin nodded. Of course, but don't think too long. 60 days moves quickly. That evening, I sat on my back porch watching Winston chase shadows across the yard. The simple joy of his movements contrasted sharply with the complexity of my situation. My phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, some expressing genuine shock, others fishing for details they could relay through the office gossip network. One message stood out. Tamar, our receptionist who had started as an intern during my early years, wrote, "They've already moved someone into your office. Box from the fancy design store downtown." Nameplate reads, Griffin Harding, Senior Client Director. Thought you should know. Griffin Harding, The CEO's nephew now had a name and my title, with senior, added for good measure. I poured a glass of wine and considered my options. I could accept the entry-level position, swallowing my pride while searching for new opportunities. I could walk away with nothing but a 2-decade gap in my resume, or I could take Devon's offer, effectively using my client relationship to establish myself independently. The third option felt like a betrayal of my professional principles. I had always prided myself on ethical conduct, on building success through service rather than manipulation. Using client relationships for personal gain seemed to cross a line I had never imagined approaching. But as night fell and I calculated how many months I could survive on my savings, something shifted in my perspective. The company had discarded 20 years of loyalty without hesitation. They had already begun erasing my contributions, rewriting the narrative of client relationships I had built. Was it really unethical to continue serving a client who valued my expertise, regardless of which company name appeared on my business card? By morning, I had made my decision, but not the one Devon expected. I arrived at the office at my usual early hour and sent a brief email accepting the entry-level position in the administrative department. Within minutes, I received confused responses from both HR and my former manager. This wasn't the outcome they had anticipated. They had expected, perhaps hoped for, an indignant resignation. When I arrived at my new desk in the administrative pool, the confusion was palpable. Younger employees whispered behind partitions, wondering why someone from upper management would accept such a demotion. My new supervisor, a woman 15 years my junior, awkwardly explained my reduced responsibilities with frequent reassurances that I probably already know this, but procedure requires I explain it. My strategy was simple: visibility and information. The entry-level position gave me legitimate access to the building, to basic company systems, and most importantly, to observe. I needed to understand exactly how Griffin Harding would approach the Midwestern financial relationship before making my next move. I called Devon that afternoon. "I've decided to accept your consulting offer," I told him, "but I'm also staying at the firm in a different capacity for now." "That's unusual," he replied, clearly surprised. "May I ask why?" "To ensure a proper transition," I said. "Midwestern deserves continuity of service. I want to make certain your needs are fully communicated to my replacement." Devon's tone suggested he didn't entirely believe this explanation, but he didn't press further. "And when would you begin consulting with us?" "I could start providing independent advisory services immediately, after hours. We'd need to be careful about potential conflicts of interest, of course." "Of course," Devon agreed, a new note of respect in his voice. He recognized strategy when he heard it. Over the next 3 weeks, I lived a carefully compartmentalized existence. During the day, I performed basic administrative tasks with meticulous attention to detail. I arrived early, stayed late, and maintained a pleasant, helpful demeanor that confused those who had expected resentment. After hours, I met with Devon and his team to develop a comprehensive analysis of their current service agreement. I created detailed documentation of every customization, every workaround, every special arrangement I had implemented over the years, knowledge that existed primarily in my head, and scattered notes rather than formal company documentation. Meanwhile, I observed Griffin Harding's approach to client management. He was exactly as Devon had described: confident but inexperienced, more focused on impressing than understanding. He made swift decisions to modernize processes without grasping their purpose. He scheduled client meetings during their busiest operational periods. He dismissed concerns raised by account team members who had worked alongside me for years. Most critically, he began dismantling the custom reporting system I had built for Midwestern Financial, insisting that transitioning to the standard platform would showcase our newest features and streamline their experience. What he failed to understand, what nobody had documented because it had evolved organically through my relationship with Devon's team, was that Midwestern operated under unique regulatory requirements due to their particular mix of financial products. The custom system wasn't a preference, it was a necessity for their compliance protocols. When the system transition began causing data inconsistencies, Griffin dismissed them as temporary migration issues rather than fundamental incompatibilities. The account team, now reporting to him, tried to raise concerns, but were overruled. 4 weeks into my demotion, Devon requested an urgent meeting with company leadership to address serious concerns about service quality. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at 9 a.m. Griffin appeared unconcerned, assuring everyone that clients always get nervous during transitions and that he would smooth things over. That Friday afternoon, I received an unexpected meeting invitation from our CEO's assistant. The calendar item simply read, Midwestern Financial Discussion with my name alongside Griffin's and the executive team. Someone had finally remembered that I might have relevant knowledge about our largest account. I spent the weekend preparing, not for the meeting as they expected, but for what would come after. I reviewed my consulting agreement with Devon, confirmed that my non-compete only covered direct competitors rather than clients, and finalized my recommendation for Midwestern's service restructuring. Monday morning arrived with the particular tension that accompanies high-stakes meetings. I selected my outfit carefully, professional but not presumptuous. When I arrived at the executive conference room, conversation stopped abruptly. The CEO's expression flickered between confusion and annoyance at my presence. Everly, he acknowledged with a nod that suggested I should explain myself. I received an invitation, I replied simply, taking a seat at the far end of the table. Before he could respond, Devon entered with Midwestern's General Counsel and Chief Operating Officer. The energy in the room shifted immediately, as everyone recognized the seriousness of 3 C-suite executives attending what should have been a routine client meeting. After brief introductions, Devon opened with devastating clarity. We've asked for this meeting to address significant concerns about our service relationship. Over the past month, we've experienced multiple system failures, missed regulatory reporting deadlines, and a concerning lack of responsiveness to our inquiries. Griffin immediately began offering reassurances, but Devon continued without acknowledgement. More troubling than these technical issues is the apparent loss of institutional knowledge about our specific needs. The custom reporting framework that was essential to our compliance protocols has been dismantled without adequate replacement. Our CEO leaned forward. Griffin has been implementing our newest enterprise platform, which offers enhanced capabilities beyond the legacy systems. There are always adjustment periods during upgrades. Devon's expression remained impassive. We weren't informed of any planned upgrades to systems that were functioning correctly for our purposes. Sometimes we need to modernize even when existing systems appear adequate. Griffin interjected with the confident tone of someone repeating a business school maxim. Devon finally turned to acknowledge him directly. Mr. Harding, the systems in question were modern. They were custom designed for our specific regulatory requirements by someone who took the time to understand our business. He shifted his gaze toward me at the end of the table. Isn't that right, Everly? All eyes turned to me. 20 years of professional restraint had prepared me for this moment. I spoke without emotion, presenting only facts. The reporting system was updated quarterly to accommodate regulatory changes. Its architecture was actually more advanced than our standard platform in several aspects, particularly in how it handled multi-jurisdictional compliance flagging. The CEO's expression tightened. If you had concerns about the transition, you should have raised them through proper channels. With all due respect, I replied, my role no longer includes client system oversight. I wasn't consulted about the changes. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Devon used the moment to slide folders across the table to each executive. We've prepared a detailed assessment of our current service agreement and identified several areas where we believe adjustments are necessary, he stated. Given recent events, we've concluded that the current arrangement no longer serves our needs. The CEO's face paled as he scanned the document's executive summary. This represents a significant restructuring of our relationship. Yes, Devon confirmed. We're unbundling several services that we believe we can manage more effectively through other means. What Devon didn't explicitly state, what was buried in the detailed appendices, was that these other means included a consulting agreement with me to rebuild and maintain the custom systems that had been dismantled at a fraction of what the company had been charging for bundled services. Griffin flipped frantically through the pages. But these changes would reduce the contract value by nearly 40%. Devin nodded. We believe that accurately reflects the value proposition under the current service model. As the implications sank in, the CEO's gaze shifted between Devin and me, calculation visible behind his eyes. Perhaps we've been hasty in some of our transition decisions. Everly clearly has valuable institutional knowledge about your needs. We could consider reinstating her previous role to ensure continuity. It was the opening I had anticipated, the moment when they would attempt to use me to salvage the relationship. Devin glanced my way, the question evident in his expression. Was this what I had been waiting for? A restoration of my position? I maintained neutral composure. That's a generous offer, but I believe my current role in administration is where the company has determined I can best contribute. The confusion on the executives' faces was momentarily satisfying. They had expected eagerness to reclaim my former status, not this passive resistance. Devin continued smoothly. We've already developed alternative arrangements for the unbundled services. We're prepared to maintain a relationship with your firm, but on these revised terms. The meeting concluded with tentative agreement to review the proposed changes, but the damage was done. As executives huddled in concerned groups afterward, I quietly returned to my administrative desk. By day's end, the ripples had spread throughout the company. The potential loss of 40% of our largest accounts revenue had triggered panic among leadership. The CEO's assistant requested a private meeting for the following morning. I had expected an offer to restore my position. Instead, I received something more revealing. The situation with Midwestern is unfortunate, the CEO began, seated behind his imposing desk. Griffin perhaps moved too quickly with system changes, but that's correctable. What concerns me is the timing of these issues coinciding with your transition. I kept my expression neutral. I'm not sure I understand. Devin Aldridge specifically requested your presence in yesterday's meeting. He referenced systems you designed. The restructuring proposal contains technical specifications that mirror your work. His eyes narrowed. Have you been communicating with Midwestern outside of company channels? As I mentioned during my transition, I've always maintained professional relationships with our clients. I replied evenly. Devin reached out after hearing about my position change, which is natural given our long professional history. The CEO leaned back, studying me. And the consulting arrangement referenced in Appendix C of their proposal? The one where they plan to hire an independent advisor to rebuild systems we're currently charging them premium rates for? I met his gaze directly. I wasn't aware of the specific details in their proposal. As you know, my system access is now limited to administrative functions. He didn't believe me. That much was clear from his expression. But he also couldn't prove anything improper. My consulting agreement with Devin had been carefully structured to begin officially after Midwestern's contract revision was finalized. Everly, his tone softened into something resembling sincerity. We've worked together for many years. I've always respected your contributions. Perhaps we acted hastily with the restructuring. Your institutional knowledge is clearly valuable. What would it take to resolve this situation amicably? The question hung between us. This was the negotiation I had anticipated, but the timing surprised me. I had expected them to try salvaging the Midwestern relationship first before approaching me with concessions. I'm not sure what you're asking, I responded, maintaining my careful neutrality. He sighed with theatrical weariness. Let's be direct. You built the Midwestern relationship. They trust you. We need that relationship to continue as it has been. Name your terms. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine accepting his offer. A restored position, perhaps with a grander title and increased compensation. The satisfaction of walking back through the office with my status not just returned, but elevated. But then I remembered sitting across from Patrice and the general counsel, being told my 20 years meant nothing. I remembered the CEO's nephew moving into my office before I'd even cleared my personal items. I remembered 2 decades of missed family gatherings, of working through pneumonia, of answering client calls on Christmas morning. I appreciate the conversation, I said, rising from my chair, but I should return to my duties. The quarterly supply inventory is due by end of day. His face registered genuine shock. You're turning down the opportunity to reclaim your position? I'm honoring the company's original decision about where my skills are best utilized, I replied. If there's nothing else, I should get back to those inventory spreadsheets. I left him staring after me, visibly struggling to comprehend my refusal. It wasn't the reaction of someone who had been plotting revenge. It was something far more confusing to him: indifference. The next 2 weeks unfolded with increasing tension throughout the company. Midwestern's contract revision moved forward despite desperate countermeasures. Griffin launched multiple initiatives to prove the value of our standard systems, each one undermined by his fundamental misunderstanding of Midwestern's regulatory requirements. Meanwhile, I performed my administrative duties with quiet precision. I accepted lunch invitations from former team members who suddenly remembered my existence. I provided factual responses when asked about Midwestern's technical needs, never volunteering information but never withholding it when directly questioned. My evening hours were spent preparing for my next chapter. Devin and I finalized the consulting framework that would allow Midwestern to reduce their service costs by 40% while maintaining all critical functions. The arrangement would provide me income comparable to my former position while requiring fewer hours, a more balanced life than I'd known in 20 years. 3 days before Midwestern's contract decision deadline, Griffin appeared at my administrative workstation. His confident demeanor had acquired a desperate edge over recent weeks. "I need your help with Midwestern," he stated without preamble. I looked up from my monitor. "How can I assist?" "The reporting system you built. Their technical team keeps referencing customizations that aren't documented anywhere. We need to replicate those functions in the standard platform before their board meeting on Friday." I had anticipated this moment. "I'd be happy to explain the system architecture. When would you like to discuss it?" Relief washed over his features. "Now, if possible, I've reserved a conference room." For the next 4 hours, I walked Griffin through the intricate system I had built over years. I explained every customization, every workaround, every special function designed specifically for Midwestern's unique requirements. I answered his increasingly frantic questions with patient clarity. What became evident to both of us was that these functions couldn't simply be replicated in the standard platform, not in 3 days, not in 3 weeks. The system I had built was the product of years of incremental adjustments based on deep understanding of the client's evolving needs. As our impromptu session concluded, Griffin's expression had transformed from desperate hope to resigned understanding. "You built all this yourself?" he asked quietly. "Over time, yes, with input from their compliance team." He shook his head slowly, and I dismantled it in 3 weeks. For the first time, I felt a flicker of sympathy for him. He was young, ambitious, and clearly intelligent. His primary failing wasn't incompetence but inexperience, and the arrogance that often accompanies it. "Systems can be rebuilt," I offered, "with proper understanding of the requirements." He gathered his notes, exhaustion evident in his movements. "The board meeting is Friday. Even if I worked around the clock, there's no way to restore what they need by then." I nodded, neither confirming nor contradicting his assessment. As he reached the door, he paused. "Why did you agree to help me today, after everything that happened?" The question was sincere, perhaps the first genuine moment we'd shared. "Because you asked," I replied simply, "and because client needs have always been my priority." He studied me for a long moment before nodding once and departing. Thursday evening, I received an unexpected call from the CEO. "Midwestern's board meets tomorrow morning," he began without greeting. "Griffin tells me you've been helpful explaining the technical requirements, but we're still facing a significant contract reduction." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied. "We've prepared a counter-proposal. Full restoration of your previous position, with a substantial increase in compensation and authority. Director level with equity participation." He paused. "In exchange for your active intervention with Midwestern, convince them to maintain the full service agreement." It was more than I had expected, significantly more. The equity offer alone represented financial security I had never achieved despite my years of service. "That's very generous," I acknowledged. "We value loyalty, Everly. Your knowledge is irreplaceable." The irony of his statement was almost painful. "And Griffin?" He'll remain in a senior position, focusing on new business development rather than existing account management. I considered the offer carefully. It represented everything I had worked toward for 20 years: recognition, authority, financial security. All I needed to do was convince Devin to continue overpaying for bundled services his company didn't need. "I appreciate the offer," I said finally, "but I don't believe I can influence Midwestern's decision at this point. Their analysis of service needs appears quite thorough." Silence stretched across the line. When he spoke again, his tone had hardened. "I see. Then I wish you luck with your future endeavors, whatever they may be." The implied threat was clear, but it held no power over me anymore. My administrative position had always been temporary, a means to an end rather than a destination. Friday morning, I submitted my resignation effective immediately. I cleared my few personal items from the administrative desk and walked through the lobby one final time. Tamar, the receptionist, gave me a knowing smile as I passed. "They're all in the executive conference room," she whispered. "Midwestern's board decision is being delivered by video call." I nodded my thanks and continued toward the exit, stepping into the bright spring morning with a curious lightness. For the first time in 20 years, I had nowhere specific I needed to be. I drove to the lakeside park where this journey had begun 5 weeks earlier. The morning air carried the scent of new growth as I followed the walking path along the water. My phone remained silent in my pocket. I had removed company email from my personal device that morning. At precisely 10:30 a.m., when I knew the Midwestern board decision would be delivered, I sat on a bench overlooking the water and finally allowed myself to feel everything I had suppressed: the hurt of betrayal, the indignity of dismissal, the uncertainty of new beginnings. The emotions washed through me without diminishing my sense of clarity. My phone vibrated with a text message from Devin. "Decision delivered. Call when you can." I gave myself another 30 minutes of peaceful solitude before making the call. "It's official," Devin said when he answered. "The board approved the revised service agreement, 40% reduction in overall fees with unbundled services as we discussed." "How did they take it?" I couldn't help asking. Devin chuckled. "Not well. Your CEO tried to salvage things with a last-minute offer to restore the custom reporting system, but our technical team made it clear that the knowledge required had left the building. Quite literally, as it turns out." I smiled despite myself. "And our consulting arrangement?" "Approved unanimously. You can start Monday if you're ready. Initial 6-month contract with option to extend or convert to permanent position." "I'll be ready," I confirmed. The weeks that followed unfolded with a rhythm entirely different from my previous professional life. I worked directly with Midwestern's technical team to rebuild the custom reporting system, this time with comprehensive documentation and training materials to ensure institutional knowledge was properly preserved. The work was challenging and satisfying. More surprisingly, it rarely extended beyond reasonable hours. For the first time in decades, I found myself with evenings free to explore interests long set aside. I joined a community garden. I took Winston to weekend training classes. I reconnected with family members who had grown accustomed to my perpetual unavailability. 3 months into my consulting arrangement, Devin invited me to lunch at a restaurant overlooking the financial district. The wall of windows provided a clear view of my former employer's building among the downtown towers. The quarterly results were announced yesterday. Devin mentioned as our meals arrived. "Your former company reported a 22% decline in revenue. Their stock dropped nearly 30 points in afternoon trading." I nodded, taking a sip of water. Not unexpected with the contract revision. "What you might find interesting is that Griffin Harding resigned last week. Apparently, he's returning to graduate school." The news surprised me. That seems wise. He has potential with proper experience and perspective. Devin studied me curiously. "You don't seem particularly satisfied by any of this. Most people would consider this the perfect revenge story, the undervalued employee who brought down the company that discarded her." I considered his assessment. That wasn't my goal. I simply recognized my own value when they failed to. And the 40% contract reduction that devastated their quarterly performance was based on an honest assessment of which services Midwestern actually needed. I replied. I would have recommended the same restructuring if I were still employed there. though I doubt anyone would have listened. Devon smiled. That's why our board approved your consulting arrangement without hesitation. Integrity is rare in this industry. As lunch concluded, Devon revealed the real purpose of our meeting. We've been discussing bringing the custom reporting system maintenance in-house permanently. The board has approved creating a new position, Director of Regulatory Systems. The role would report directly to me with a team of 4 technical specialists. You're offering me a permanent position, I observed, with compensation approximately double your former salary, given the critical nature of compliance systems in our industry. Plus actual work-life balance, we've noticed how much more efficiently you operate without the artificial pressure of 80-hour weeks. The offer was compelling in every aspect, yet I found myself hesitating. May I think about it? I asked. The consulting arrangement has provided flexibility I've never experienced professionally. Devon nodded. Take whatever time you need. The role was created with you in mind, but we understand if you prefer independence after your experience. That evening, sitting on my back porch watching Winston chase fireflies across the yard, I reflected on the journey of recent months. The company that had defined my professional identity for 20 years was struggling in my absence. The consulting work I now performed provided greater financial security with significantly less personal sacrifice. Midwestern's job offer represented the recognition and compensation I had always deserved. Yet the most profound change wasn't professional at all. It was the discovery that my value wasn't defined by a title or a company's assessment. The skills I had developed, the relationships I had built, the knowledge I had acquired, these belonged to me regardless of where I applied them. The revenge fantasy I had briefly entertained during those first painful days after my demotion now seemed oddly hollow. The company's struggling performance brought me no particular satisfaction. Griffin's resignation elicited more sympathy than triumph. Even the CEO's desperate final offer had felt more sad than vindicating. What satisfied me deeply was rebuilding my life on my own terms, creating boundaries that honored both my professional capabilities and my personal needs. The company had eliminated my position, but in doing so, they had inadvertently freed me from limitations I hadn't recognized. 1 week later, I accepted Midwestern's offer with negotiated modifications to preserve certain flexible work arrangements. The day I signed the contract, I drove past my former employer's building. The company logo still illuminated the upper floors, though rumors of downsizing and possible acquisition had begun circulating through industry channels. I felt no animosity as I glanced up at the familiar tower, only a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes losing what we think defines us creates space for discovering who we truly are. 6 months later, an industry newsletter reported that my former company had been acquired by a larger competitor. The CEO had stepped down to pursue other opportunities. The acquisition price represented a 50% devaluation from the previous year's market position. The article mentioned the unexpected loss of key client relationships as a contributing factor to the company's vulnerable position. A small photo accompanying the piece showed moving boxes being carried from the executive floor of the building where I had spent 2 decades of my life. When Devon forwarded me the article with a question mark as his only comment, I replied with simple honesty. Every company makes choices about what they truly value. Some learn too late that relationships and institutional knowledge can't be replaced by nepotism and titles. That evening, I hosted a dinner party, something I had never found time for during my former life. Colleagues from Midwestern mingled with neighbors and friends from my community garden. As conversation and laughter filled my small lakeside home, I realized that the most powerful form of reclaiming your value isn't found in revenge at all. It's found in creating a life that honors your worth when others fail to see it. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or cast aside despite your dedication and excellence, remember this: your value doesn't diminish based on someone's inability to see it. The most satisfying response to those who undervalue you isn't plotting elaborate revenge, it's building something better that they can't access. Have you ever experienced a professional betrayal that ultimately led to something better? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now to find the courage to recognize their own worth. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Every week, We share authentic stories of people who found unexpected strength in their most challenging moments. Don't miss our next upload. Sometimes the stories that seem most ordinary contain the most extraordinary wisdom about reclaiming your power.